Good morning. Welcome everyone to the Bowling Green Unitarian Universalist Church. Put your cell phones on silence, please. We're a welcoming congregation. Whoever you are, however you identify, wherever you come from, and whoever you love, you are welcome here. Our Sunday services are different each week so that we can honor and learn from our wide array of traditions and beliefs. We start our service with lighting the chalice, which has been a symbol of Unitarian Universalism since in the Second World War. Ken Kewen is going to light the chalice today. Hum, rise up, O flame. Our opening words this morning are number 657 in the blue hymnal. If you would turn to that, it's a responsive reading, and I'll read the regular print if you'll very gently and quietly read the italicized. 657 in the gray hymnal. Some beliefs are like walled gardens. They encourage exclusiveness and the feeling of being especially privileged. Other beliefs are expansive and lead the way into wider and deeper sympathies. Some beliefs are like shadows, clouding children's days with fears of unknown calamities. Other beliefs are like sunshine, blessing children with the warmth of happiness. Some beliefs are divisive, separating the saved from the unsaved, friends from enemies. Other beliefs are bonds in a world community where sincere differences beautify the pattern. Some beliefs are like blinders, shutting off the power to choose one's own direction. Other beliefs are like gateways, opening wide vistas for exploration. Some beliefs weaken a person's selfhood. They blight the growth of resourcefulness. Other beliefs nurture self-confidence and enrich the feeling of personal worth. Some beliefs are rigid, like the body of death, impotent in a changing world. Other beliefs are pliable, like the young sapling, ever growing with the upward thrust of life. It's by Sophia Lyon Foss, who was an early RE director in Unitarianism. Our first hymn is number 297, The Star of Truth. We're not really familiar with it, but if you would hum along with it, and Forrest, if you would play through it 3 times, if you'll pay attention to verses 1, 2, and 4 as it's being played. things when we can. It's really a pretty tune that we've never used as far as I know. This is time for our offertory. Our church is supported by you, by our members and friends. We have no other income. So please contribute as you're able and mindful of what the church means to you. You can do this online, or we have plates at each entrance that you can put money or checks in, stocks, bonds, whatever, as you leave. Okay, Horace. We'll have a period of silence, meditation, prayer, and at the end we'll hum Spirit of Life. Just follow the bell into silence. Follow your breathing. Our speaker today is Dr. Matt Foraker. He works in institutional research and teaches for the Honors College and Math Department at Western. He has degrees in electrical engineering, mathematics, and higher education. His interests include cinema, data science, Scotch, and the study of consciousness, not necessarily in that order. Matt.
morning. Thanks so much for coming and hearing what I have to say today. Today's talk is about critical thinking and disinformation. And really, in a certain respect, it's a lot more about disinformation than it is critical thinking. But in order for this to really make sense, it's good to spend a few minutes on critical thinking and what critical thinking is, and then I'm going to get into the disinformation part. So what is critical thinking? Next slide. Critical thinking is the art of analyzing and evaluating thought processes with a view to improving them. So really what critical thinking is, in a nutshell, is you're taking a step back and saying, is what I'm doing making sense? Is my logic sound? Is my data sound? What I just read is Richard Paul's definition. Another way to think about it is critical thinking is thinking that critiques its reasoning, the thinking used to arrive at decisions, develop plans, assess information, apply logic, and reach conclusions. Now, the way that I think about it in IR, because you do exercise critical thinking in IR, we do statistics about students, the way I think about it in IR is first you look at your data. Is the information that you're looking at accurate? How is it collected? Does it make sense? Once you've got the data that you're looking at, then you're looking at your logic and your reasoning. And there's a part of critical thinking that could literally be a semester course in logic that they teach in a philosophy department. So there's the application of your reasoning, if P then Q and all that kind of stuff based on the data. And then what lens are you wearing or what lens do you have on as you're doing this work? Okay, next slide. Next slide. Hello? Okay, good. Okay, so this kind of is just repeating what I just said, but I just want you to actually see these bullets. So it raises vital questions clearly and precisely. We're going to get into the precision. That's one of the major methods of the disinformation folks, is they use vagueness and obscurity in order to cloud your thinking. The disinformation is the dark side of the forest that we're going to get to really soon here. Gathers and assesses the relevant information, keyword relevance. Well-reasoned, that's your logic, your arguments. Are they sound? And you spend quite a bit of time talking about, is this argument sound or not? And are the premises, the data that it's based on, sound? You remained open-minded. Nothing can cloud critical thinking quite like a closed mind that refuses to take in additional information. And this is what really today's talk is all about. Recognizing false information. That's what we're going to spend most of our time on. Okay, next slide. Just real quick, some of the impediments that can get in the way. These are just the natural characteristics of human being. We were brought up in a certain culture. We were brought up in a certain environment. That can cause us to not see or consider some things. I won't read them all, but being closed-minded, deceiving yourself, believing what you want to believe as opposed to what the data are saying. And then a big one that drives a lot of what we're talking about this morning is greed. The motivation for disinformation, more often than not, is people wanting to make money. So Richard Paul actually breaks critical thinking into the elements of thought. Next slide. And, that black didn't come out too well. I'm just going to really briefly go over this, but the idea is he breaks it into these 8 components, and then he breaks those 8 components into their pieces. So if you really wanted to spend time on this, in terms of your thinking and how you're going about a particular question or a particular analysis, you could actually use his model and break it into those pieces and go, how am I doing with each of these pieces? Is what I'm doing making sense? But just really quick, the purpose, what am I trying to accomplish? What am I doing here? What's this about? What questions should I be asking? That is huge. Asking the right question versus asking the wrong question can make a huge difference. I'll refer you to a movie, the movie Moneyball, starring Brad Pitt, about baseball, that right out of the gate, he's saying, hey, wait a minute, we're not asking the right questions. What does it take to win a baseball game? And he asked a completely different set of questions, and it produced extraordinary results. What data am I relying on? Is it accurate? Inferences and conclusions, that's your logic, your reasoning, your arguments. What concepts are involved? What are you taking for granted? Is there anything that you're assuming that's just not really so? You want to take that into account. The consequences of your conclusions, you want to consider what those might be. And all of this is permeated with your point of view. What's the lens through which you see the world? Helping yourself distinguish that might lead to some insights that you wouldn't otherwise have. All right? Now I've gotten through the part of the academic piece. Let's get to the part where, for me, it's going to start to be a little bit more fun, which is how the bad guys operate and what they do to confuse clear thinking. So next slide. These are the devices that most often get used to cloud your thinking. The first one and the most common use, actually, the first two are the ones that are the most common. Rhetoric is really a big item in promoting disinformation. So one of the first rhetorical devices is the euphemism. I'm sure you've heard of the euphemism. In case you don't know, a euphemism is when you call something another name that makes it seem nicer than it really is. So instead of calling them a prisoner, you call them detainees. Instead of saying innocent casualties or innocent fatalities, you say collateral damage. There's all sorts of euphemisms that get used to help disguise what it is that's happening. Now, a word that I have difficulty pronouncing, and I'm going to try to pronounce it correctly, dysphemism, that's the opposite of a euphemism. That thing is when you call it something worse than it is. It's a derogatory name that you use in order to poison a person's clear understanding of what it is. So for an example of this would be, say there's a mental health institute and you're in some conversation and you refer to it as a loony bin. That's a dysphemism. You're calling something a name that makes it worse than what it is. What you see in advertisements a lot are what are called weaselers. And again, this is all rhetoric that I'm talking about right now. A weaseler occurs in lots of advertisements. Come to this store right now and you can save up to 70%. Up to 70%. Put your critical thinking hat on. What does that actually mean? A critical thinker is going to say up to 70%. Pfft. What, they have one item in the store at 70%. They're telling the truth? You could possibly win a prize. If you buy right now, you'll be entered into a chance to win. Possibly, perhaps, almost, up to, that's all rhetoric designed to conceal the actuality so you can't accuse them of lying. It's a way that they can get away. We told the truth. You can save up to 70%. We had this one item that was on the shelf over there. Well, they're all sold out, but that was 70% off. Okay, that's the weaseler. Then there's the downplayer. The downplayer is when you want to negate or in some way just completely invalidate something. Well, she got some PhD from some podunk school somewhere. You're downplaying the accomplishment or whatever it is that you're trying to downplay. So that's all rhetoric. Those are examples of rhetoric. Another big one is the relevance fallacy, and you've probably heard of some of these. Everybody hear of the red herring? The red herring, it's a completely irrelevant. The story where that comes from is actually interesting enough to share. A herring is a really smelly fish. And so if you're a fugitive or a very clever fox and you're running from hounds trying to sniff your trail, what you do is you smear a herring across where you're running. And then when those hound dogs come up on the smell of that fish, it completely screws up their noses and they can't sniff you out anymore. And they go on what's called a wild goose chase. You probably heard this language before. It throws the hounds off your trail. Okay? The other big relevance fallacy, and this gets used a lot, and you've probably heard of it, is the straw man. The straw man is where you twist a particular position into something that's ridiculous and then argue against the ridiculous thing, and of course everybody agrees with you because what you've said is ridiculous. Consider gender equality. Well, if we have gender equality, there won't be any segregation in sports, and in all of the Olympics and in all professional sports, men and women will have to play together. Or high school girls will have to take showers with high school boys after gym. That's not what gender equality is, but that's the use of a straw man. That's what the straw man's about. Let's see. Guilt by association, you associate somebody. We'll get to an example of that. And then there's the burden of proof. Shifting the burden of proof. Imagine you're on a used car lot, and the used car salesman says, "You need to really tell me why you don't need this car." Well, if you take the bait, now all of a sudden you're in the position of having to prove to him why you don't need that car. It's not your job to prove to him why you don't need that car. If you don't want the car, you don't want the car. But that's shifting the burden of truth. Probably if you put your political hat on, you can see that everything I'm talking about is all over the place in politics. Let's see. Induction fallacies, those are a little bit more complicated, but it has to do with generalizations. Another induction fallacy is mistaken appeal to a common belief. A certain politician who used to be president that I won't name used to love to say, well, everybody knows that. We all believe that. Nobody thinks that. That's part of an induction fallacy. And then formal fallacies, I won't even cover that. You can look that up. But formal fallacies have to do with the manipulation of language and semantics in order to twist the truth. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is an important slide because, believe it or not, and even I wasn't clear about this until about a year ago, the difference between misinformation and disinformation. And we're about to get to what I consider to be the good stuff. Misinformation is when it's not deliberate. It can occur as deliberate, but it's really not. Misinformation is incompetence. Misinformation is a mistake. Somebody actually emails the wrong data set, and the analysts don't realize it's the wrong data set, and they draw conclusions and publish results that are completely ridiculous. It's not deliberate. Disinformation is deliberate. It's by design. There's actually people working. How can we make this happen? And I've got some examples coming. Okay, next slide. This is a classic misinformation story. It is probably the most famous misinformation story out there. In 1936, prior to the presidential election, but I always forget his name, Alf Landon and FDR, the Literary Digest magazine, they seriously, 2.2 million people responded to the poll that they put out, and that poll predicted that Alf Landon would win by an absolute landslide. I mean, landslide. Next slide. That's not what happened. Not at all. FDR won 40, it was 48 states back then. FDR won 46 of them. It was a slaughter. I mean, it was an absolute steamroll landslide. This magazine had, for a few months, been promoting widely the exact opposite would occur. Next slide. So people asked what happened. And this was the cover they put after this occurred. Their poll, put your history hat on, their poll was to magazine subscribers, registered owners of cars, and people who had telephones. This is 1936, no cell phones. In order to have a telephone, you had to have a what? A wall that it hangs on. What's happening in 1936? We're in the midst of the Great Depression. Half the people don't even have a house. How many had cars? And in 1936, people that can barely eat, you think they're subscribing to the Literary Digest? That's misinformation. It destroyed the magazine. They were out of business, I want to say 2 years later, but you could look that up. Next slide. This was something, I actually saw this and went, no way, when I read the article. I couldn't believe this actually happened. It contains one of the most ridiculous statistics I've ever seen in something published. But what happened is a very reputable, it was the American Medical Association, but they contracted another group to do this poll about spring break for college kids. And the poll came back, and it said that spring break was just this absolute fest of debauchery, mayhem, irresponsibility. Everybody's doing everybody's drinking, they made it sound like it was an absolute, just, yeah. No, that's not the way college, no, not true at all. I mean, the statistic that just about had me fall off my chair, 3 out of 5 students reported having a friend who drank until they passed out and had memory loss. Now, I'd like to just think for a second. Let's say me and 10 guys go somewhere and I do something. And then you ask those, and we're friends, and then you ask those 10 guys, how many of you have a friend who did that? 10 out of 10 are going to say they had a friend who did that. Does that mean 10 out of 10 did it? I'm the only one who did it. So there's 3 out of 5. I literally laughed and dropped the paper when I read that statistic because it is so patently absurd. Well, of course, people like myself and others squawked This made the cover of USA Today. It was actually on TV news. This was in 2006. You can Google this thing. It's a famous study. You can read about it. When the analysis finally got done, it was an online survey without any vetting whatsoever of the people that were participating, and it turned out to be a bunch of sorority girls having fun while they were at a party, filling the thing out online, and when the analysis was complete, less than a fourth of the respondents had ever even been on spring break. They were completely making stuff up. That's misinformation, and it was profoundly embarrassing to all of the parties that are involved. Next slide. This is a survey that actually happened. I don't remember the year. It's at least 10 years ago, but there was a phone survey conducted in Ohio asking people if they approved a constitutional amendment to ban same-sex marriage. Here's how they conducted the poll. They called landlines only between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. Monday through Friday. Who are they going to get? They're going to get your grandma, right? They're certainly not going to get me. So is that misinformation or disinformation? Not sure. If it was deliberate, and like people don't do this, the sampling, you can absolutely, it could be disinformation, or it could just be incompetence. All right, next slide. Okay, this is the Thomas Jefferson quote that I started with. We're now going to start to get specific, and here's where I start to smile more, because this stuff is amazing. This is a 2014. You can Google it. Fairleigh Dickinson did a poll, Fairleigh Dickinson College. I want to say about 1,500 people in the study. They analyzed how well people understood the national events, what's going on in the country, based on the news that they watch. And it was a very rigorous study, and they implemented a lot of controls. And not surprisingly, the people that watched NPR scored the highest. The Sunday shows came in next, then The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. Those people actually scored pretty well. The people that watched no news whatsoever, none, scored significantly higher than the people that watch Fox News. So in other words, you could take a lounge chair, go to the church parking lot, and stare at the pavement, and you're going to score better than somebody who's watching Fox News. He whose mind is filled with nonsense is, ignorance is closer to the truth than a mind full of nonsense. So how does this happen? Next slide, please. This is reality, guys. Everything I'm going to be talking about is reality. I'm not making anything up. This is an actual graph that was published in Fox News. I forget that it was 2011. It was Mitt Romney against Barack Obama. They were trying to make Obama look bad. And this one's a little bit subtle. But if you look at this graph carefully, you'll start to go, hey, wait a minute. Next slide. Look at where the 8.6 is versus the 8.8. Unemployment was falling. They didn't want to show that. Fox News is notorious for lying with graphs, misleading, doing things that distort and misrepresent. I like this next one on Obamacare. Next slide. I kind of get a hoot out of that one. It doesn't work if you know how to read, but they've analyzed their audience, all right? I still get a kick out of that one. Okay, this next one gives you an idea of the obscurity. This is where I can illustrate critical thinking, I think, reasonably well. Next slide. Major websites attacking white people. Put your critical thinking hat on, and you immediately start to say, well, wait a minute. What websites? What websites are you talking about? Then, what white people? What white people are getting attacked? How does a website attack a white person? What's actually happening here? The story doesn't say. They keep it vague. But can you see that what it does for a certain population, they get riled up. They think that white people are being attacked. I mean, think, what would Facebook do? How does Facebook attack a white person? It does what it does, but it's what people are posting. It's nonsense. I'll just jump to the punchline. This is complete nonsense. I really like this next one. Next slide. Gender equality angers Girl Scouts. Okay, well, what's gender equality? Now, I already referenced gender equality earlier because I actually heard, I have zero proof, I can't prove it, but a bird flew in my mouth about this one. my mouth. No. A bird flew in my ear. A bird flew in my ear. I wonder if that's a slip of some kind that means something. Anyway, a bird flew into my ear and whispered that the way they got this result is they actually did poll some Girl Scouts. But then they said, if there's gender equality, high school girls after gym class will have to shower in the open with high school boys. Some of the Girl Scouts didn't respond favorably to that idea. And that's what produced the headline. This is disinformation, guys. This is what I'm talking about. The critical thinker acquires the skills to recognize it. If there's anything to take away from this talk, that's really what I'm trying to get at. The ability to recognize disinformation and see what's so and what's not so. Next slide. Okay, can you make that play? If you can't, I can talk to it.
Have sparked the interest of
Okay,
millions,
great. This is just a
literally, of
minute.
children around the globe, demanding action for climate change. What's your message to world leaders today?
My message is that we'll be watching you. This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
Okay, next slide. Well, you can imagine how the fossil fuel folks and the climate change deniers felt about Greta's activity and her speeches. And they did one of the classic moves, which is called here's the Latin, argumentum ad hominem, which is you shoot the messenger. Since you can't really shoot the message too well, because what she said, kind of hard to argue with that, they went after her. And so the German Marshall Foundation conducted a very rigorous study, and they got into details about how the Twitter accounts fed the different accounts. They really get into the science of it. But what I just wanted to present, here's the way they undermined her credibility. She has a mild diagnosis of Asperger's, so they tried to make that mean that she can't think clearly or speak effectively about anything. They found a T-shirt that she was wearing that was anti-fascist. They tried to tie her to Antifa. I'm not going to get into what Antifa is, but it's a movement. It's got some controversy because apparently they're willing to get violent. Soros, that's a guy who's in charge of I think I wrote it down, the Open Society Foundation. It's a liberal organization that funds programs and projects to promote equity and help people eat, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of a do-good type foundation, operates in over 200 countries. They tried to associate her with him. He's somebody that conservatives really love to hate. Her age, they took advantage of her age and claimed that she was a puppet of her parents, a puppet of climate change proponents, and then they even created this notion of a climate industrial complex that's seeking to use climate change for power and profit. I'm not going to try to promote or not promote any of those ideas. The key of this talk is that they went after her credibility after she gave those talks. Okay, this next one will get as techie as I have time for. Next slide. Okay, this is a big deal. And I have all my sources for this, so if you really want to dig deeper into this, Russia does this. Russia has literally an official information warfare department. They have an information warfare organization that deliberately has campaigns of disinformation targeting the United States and Western Europe, and they're good at it. And they've had a lot of success, and they've stirred up a lot of trouble. I'm going to try to give you a sense of how this works, but basically you've got four components. I've got the 3 people components up here, but the component that's not listed is you have to be a propaganda expert. So what they do is they understand how propaganda works. You can take an entire course in propaganda, but in a nutshell, really effective propaganda is when you embed your lie, you embed what you want people to believe inside of other things they're already predisposed to believe or they already believe. So you say 2 + 2 is 4, 3 + 3 is 6, 5 + 7 is 287, and 3 + 5 is 8. They believe 3 out of the 4, so they go along. Obviously, math's not a good example, but when it's politics or other types of arguments, they can really get good at it. And in particular, when you get it online and you get it repeated, which is what this is all about, it can be very effective. So they fabricate some story that they want. It fits all the requirements for effective propaganda. And what they do, there's a team of cyber warriors. They know what they're doing, they know how. And this team of cyber warriors releases the message into the internet, online, and then these are robots. These are not people. These are programs, thousands of programs. You've probably heard of the bots. You've probably heard of bots on Facebook. They disguise themselves as people. They tweet, they retweet, they connect to each other. So you have bots connecting to bots, and the whole thing replicates. And it explodes online. And then the other thing that you need people sympathetic, people that will just eat what you're serving like it's spiced rice, the true believers. These are actual people. You need a network of true believers which will then see what's happening with these bots, and then they retweet it. And they continue to feed into the message, and it becomes this reinforcing cycle. And if it reaches a certain critical mass, or what's called a trend, it can then make the bridge into mainstream media and actually get reported in the news that is considered reputable. Let me go on to the process map. This is one way they capture it as a process map. It's kind of showing you what I already said. You've got your cyber team. You've got the propaganda. Oh, we hacked an email from so-and-so to Hillary that said this. Remember all that email stuff about Hillary? Fake news, real news that supports propaganda. It's anything that's emotional goes into the bot network. The true believers. The whole thing resonates. Certain journalists, in particular, in the case of the Russians, it's usually right-wing, tend to be their true believers. Breitbart, people like that. And then finally, if they're successful, it goes to the outside network and becomes part of the discourse of the country. Next slide. This was the 2016 election effort. The Russians were very aggressive at this, and these are the things that they do. They've had success in the United States. They've also had success in Western Europe. In particular, where they've had some success in Western Europe is anti-immigration sentiments. They love to stir up anti-immigration sentiments, and they've had some success in Western Europe, including Germany. But in 2016, anything discrediting to Hillary Clinton, they jumped on. Anything they could find. They asserting that the news media hides information. Well, something bad happened here, but they don't tell you about it, et cetera, et cetera. I won't read all of those. The true believers, alt-right, believe it or not, with the election with Hillary, there were some very disgruntled Bernie Sanders supporters that would jump on anything that was anti-Hillary. So anything anti-Hillary, Breitbart, 4chan, that's where Q got started. I'm going to talk about Q in a minute. Hackers, professional trolls, and the bot network. This is how it works. And we know they do this. Next slide. Okay, Q. I don't remember the exact year, I don't remember the year. Begins dropping tweet-like clues on the 4chan free speech website. And he makes it sound like he's very high up, he's got access to inside information, and he creates this conspiracy theory that there's this deep state working against Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is a hero trying to free the world from the deep state. Next slide. He asserts that Satan-worshiping elites who run a child sex ring are trying to control our politics and media. And believe it or not, people bought into this big time, big time. They still are. I've got another slide coming in a second. Pizzagate. People heard of Pizzagate? Anybody hear that? I see both. I see nods and shaking heads. Pizzagate. There's this place in D.C. that serves pizza called Comet Ping Pong. And Q asserted that there was a secret dungeon in the basement of this pizza place, and that in this secret dungeon you could buy babies to have your way with and then kill and eat. And I don't know how well you can read it. My NYPD source said vile, serious, and just Wiener's device. Leaked cell phone of his cell phone device. The email detail, Wiener, Bill and Hillary on their pedophile billionaire friends plane, the Lolita Express. This is all made up. Yep, Hillary has a well-documented predilection for underage girls. This is all made up. But the Q folks buy it hook, line, and sinker. And you know you've hit the home run, and you know you've reached critical mass when no matter what you say, people believe you, because if what you say is completely false, they call it an exception. And if what you say happens to have some truth to it, they call it proof that you know what you're talking about. Q managed to pull that off. And to give you proof that Q managed to pull that off, next slide. How long ago was that? November 2nd, 2021. That was Tuesday. This just happened Tuesday. Fact. You can absolutely look this up. On Tuesday, hundreds and hundreds of people from around the country converged on Dealey Plaza in downtown Dallas with the following conviction. John F. Kennedy, yes, John F. Kennedy, the one who was killed in 1963. John F. Kennedy, killed in 1963, and JFK Jr., his son, died in a plane crash, 1999, were going to emerge in the flesh at Dealey Plaza, emerge triumphantly, and reinstate Trump as president of the United States. They believed that. So what I invite you to consider is that with disinformation and the way these bubbles work, you can get people to believe anything. If you can believe this, that's not fiction. Trump, JFK Jr. Oh, this is the Q slogan, where we go one, we go all. It's possible to get people to believe anything. So I'm going to wrap with, what do we do? Well, I don't know what we do. I don't really have an answer for how we solve a problem like this, but I do have some questions that I think are worth asking. What can burst bubbles? What could we do that would break the bubbles and the echo chambers that people can get isolated into? What can break down walls? What can break down walls? How can we expose lies for what they are? Ultimately, I think the solution, although this doesn't tell us how to do it, I think what we need to do is my final slide, which is next. Thomas Jefferson said this over 200 years ago. Educate and inform the whole mass of the people. They are the only sure reliance for the preservation of our liberty. He said this when our country was practically just born. And I think that's what there is to do. I wish I could tell you how we do it. So that was my talk for today. Thanks so much for listening to me, and I hope you found it worthwhile.
Okay, Matt, we have a few minutes. Would you be interested in taking some questions?
I can try.
Okay, I'll start off with one. We have a tendency to believe things that are similar to things we already believe. It's called confirmation bias.
Yes.
And we tend to think that things are false if they go counter to things we believe. How do we become more aware of that?
Good question. I wish I had an answer. I'm at questions at this point. I have not figured out the solution yet, and I'm not sure if anybody has. I have not found solutions. We're, as a country, and I would say Western Europe as well, we're still struggling. Now, I'm not saying we do this, but I'll tell you, you don't get away with this in China.
No.
China's like, not happening, but no free speech in China.
That's right.
So you're good question, yeah.
Natalie.
Use the microphone. Yeah. Use the mic. Matt.
tech challenge.
Hello?
Make sure the light's green on it.
Ah, there it is. Okay. You explained what's happening in Russia. I'm assuming, I make an assumption, which could be wrong, that we have the same here in the United States. In other words, we have the same people who are trying to get disinformation in Russia, right, and all of that. Are they working on our behalf? Because we can't know this, right? But you might know something. Do we have people in our government that are working 24/7 on this issue?
What I do know that we have. What I do know that we have is that we do have, I don't know if it's CIA or NSA, I don't know where it is, but we do have people working to defend against disinformation. We have people working to stop disinformation before it does what it did in 2016. So we're on the defense. In terms of the offense, just guessing, I'd say we've probably got some stuff going on, but I haven't seen or heard anything that would prove that or suggest that. Common sense would kind of make you think that we may have something in that regard, but the answer is I don't know.
It's called a liberal arts education.
Yeah, Jan says it's a liberal arts education.
Anybody else have a question or a comment? You go. All right, close.
I can't say that I have ever changed any minds, but one of the things that I do when I'm engaging with people who share viewpoints different from mine, rare as that happens, is that I try to ask them why they believe what they believe. I don't try to correct them. I just get them talking, and hopefully they can back themselves into a corner.
One thing that I was going to mention is I'm actually going to be teaching a course in critical thinking and discerning reality for the Honors College this spring. And I'm hoping, I don't know that this will be the case, but the way that course is going to be taught is going to be lots and lots of discussion, not nearly as much lecture. And I might be able to answer some questions a lot better in 6 months after working with these kids for an entire semester and talking about exactly this kind of stuff and asking these kinds of questions. We'll see. Right now, I've really just started this, and I'm way more questions than answers at this point.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Matt, for preparing so thoroughly and presenting such an engaging talk. And I think, critical thinking is essential. I'm finding in my extended family that there are people who believe, in particularly with regard to the vaccine, and people who believe radically different things, and the division of our nation based on, widely diverging beliefs, it really undermines, I think, what we're trying to accomplish. And so any and everything we can do to help people use their brains effectively is going to be wonderful. And I think that's what we try to do in this church as well. So this was a great topic for us. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then another thing I want to just mention with the Russians is I forgot to mention the overarching, well, what are they really trying to do? And they said, we're trying to create chaos. We're trying to create conflict and chaos among our enemies. And anything we can do that stokes that is what our disinformation is about. And one of the things I wanted to mention is anything that fuels racial tension and racial unrest and the us versus them. In Germany, they really go after the immigrant conversation. And Germany has had to deal with some things associated with anti-immigration. Russia's feeding that. What I can't quite figure out is, why does Russia want to... Anyway, yeah.
Anyone else? I think Putin wants to really expand his power and influence.
I've been a teacher all my life, and my husband, we're both science educators. And we tried to teach the scientific method, which is exactly critical thinking. And I've always worked my whole career to get classroom teachers to teach critical thinking and use critical thinking. And I'm not in the classroom. Are there any teachers here or people know are teachers engaging in critical thinking in their regular content every day? And at the university, you're going to teach a course, but are your fellow faculty members using critical thinking in their courses on an everyday basis?
Okay, one more and then we'll need to go on.
I was just going to answer your question because I was actually going to comment on this, but I didn't know how to say it. I'm in high school, and yeah, they are actually, which I was like, yay, I actually took a picture of one of your slides because I'm in an AP language and composition class, and one of your slides is like exactly what we're studying, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to email my teacher and tell her that like, look, we're seeing critical thinking used outside of the classroom, and even not in just like, because something I notice a lot in more advanced classes, because that's what I'm taking, is the more educated a person is, the more decisive they are in their opinions, and that causes like a lot of chaos in our classes sometimes. But also like in my regular business classes, like our teachers make us, analyze like website sources to make sure that we're using the right sources and that things are real. So yeah, if that makes you feel better.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting and a very important topic. Announcements. There's a petition. Yeah.
The League of Women Voters petition against redistricting is outside, and I will be picking it up and sending it in. If you haven't signed, it's out there today. Thanks, everyone. Last day for the World Trade Studio Tour is today. Come see Laura's work and Karen's work and everybody else. It's a little smaller than here, so they really would appreciate attendance at it.
Okay, our closing words are number 458, mindful of truth. Mindful of truth, ever exceeding our knowledge, and community ever exceeding our practice. Reverently we covenant together, beginning with ourselves as we are, to share the strength of intense integrity and the heritage of the Spirit in the unending quest for wisdom and love. Have closing music. If you want to talk, please go outside for conversation. Forrest? And end the service with extinguishing the chalice.